Welcome to True Crime Case Files. On this episode, we uncover the details of a shocking romance between a teen boy and a 90-year-old woman. A relationship that would ultimately take a dark turn and end in grisly murder. Join us as we explore the twists and turns of this unexpected connection and the tragic violence that shattered it. Brock Jamison was a 19-year-old with big dreams and a larger-than-life personality. He worked as an aide at Sunset Palms Retirement Community, a high-end retirement home in Britain, Florida. Brock was no ordinary staff member. His charisma and charm had quickly won him the admiration of many residents, particularly a woman named Helen Mathers, who would become one of his first and most significant connections at the facility. Helen was a 90-year-old retired strip club owner who had once run clubs across the East Coast, from Brooklyn to Atlantic City. They met one evening at a Muscle Man event in the community's lounge. Brock had been assigned to help coordinate the event, and it wasn't long before Helen caught his eye. Her glamorous style and fascinating stories from her stripping days drew him in, and he found himself spending hours by her side that night, laughing and learning about her past. Their relationship quickly deepened. What started as a friendly bond between a lively aide and a resident soon evolved into a secretive romantic and sexual affair. For Helen, Brock was a reminder of the excitement and attention she had once relished, while for Brock, Helen's generosity fed his desire for a taste of luxury. Soon she began gifting him expensive clothing, watches, and even small sums of cash, which Brock used to fund his active nightlife and occasionally his drug habit. This relationship became a stepping stone for him as he began engaging in sex with other residents, both male and female, many of whom offered him similar rewards in exchange for his attention and sexual companionship. Brock's lifestyle was fast-paced and risky. He saw himself as living on the edge, a bad boy like the characters on his favorite reality shows, such as Keeping Up with the Kardashians and Vanderpump Rules. In his mind, this job was his ticket to a future in show business. The attention he got from the elderly residents gave him a thrill, a sense of control and importance that he hadn't experienced before. Despite the superficial glamour, Brock's life was often messy. His nights were sometimes fueled by a mix of alcohol, marijuana, and even cocaine, which he sourced from connections he had made while clubbing in nearby Tampa. While his job and sexual entanglements excited him, it also left him feeling hollow at times. He talked often about wanting more, to be famous, to see his name in lights. Yet, the double life he led also weighed on him. He began documenting his experiences in a hidden notebook, where he detailed the intimate lives of the residents and his relationships with them, hoping one day to use this material for a tell-all blog that he imagined would be his first claim to fame. Brock had no idea that his plans would soon put him in a dangerous situation. His dreams, his lifestyle, and his relationships would ultimately lead to a tragic end. On January 26, 2016, around 8:00 a.m., a housekeeper at Sunset Palms Retirement Community made a grisly discovery. Eva Bosco, a 34-year-old staff member who had been with the retirement home for years, was performing her morning rounds in the resident suites. She entered room 409, expecting it to be empty. Instead, she found Brock Jamison lying on the floor, lifeless and covered in blood. Eva described the scene as something she'd never forget. Brock was sprawled out, his eyes and chest showing severe wounds that appeared to have been inflicted with something sharp, later identified as a knitting needle. The sheer amount of blood on the floor and surrounding furniture suggested a violent struggle had taken place. Eva was so shaken that she immediately ran from the room, calling out to nearby staff for help. Within minutes, the facility's supervisor, along with several other aides, rushed to the scene and called 911. When paramedics and police arrived shortly after, they were stunned by the brutality of the scene. Eva was standing outside, visibly shaken, barely able to answer their questions. She later recalled in interviews that she had initially thought Brock's death was a terrible accident. After all, many of the residents were elderly, and it wasn't uncommon for a fall or medical emergency to be fatal. But what she found in that room was something out of a nightmare, a sight she associated more with horror films than with her daily job at Sunset Palms. News of the discovery spread quickly among the residents and staff. To prevent panic, the retirement community management initially told the residents that Brock's death was due to natural causes. This statement, however, didn't match up with the hushed whispers and worried glances among staff. Despite the attempt to keep things quiet, some of the residents sensed that there was more to the story. Within hours, the rumor mill was buzzing throughout Sunset Palms. By that evening, Brock's death had reached local news. Reporters from nearby Bradenton and even Tampa began gathering outside the retirement home, hoping to catch a glimpse or get statements from staff or residents. Questions about who could have killed such a young man in such a violent way, and why it would happen in a peaceful retirement community, had everyone on edge. As police secured the scene, a full-scale investigation began. Bradenton police arrived swiftly at Sunset Palms retirement community on the morning of January 26, 2016. Leading the investigation were Detectives Teresa Giovanelli and Jim Buntley. Detective Giovanelli, known for her sharp instincts and steady presence, had worked on several high-profile cases in the area. Buntley, her famously well-endowed partner, a former adult film star who had made a pivot to law enforcement, was equally dedicated but had a more methodical approach, preferring to analyze evidence slowly and thoroughly. Upon entering room 409, the detectives found themselves in a chilling scene. Blood spattered the plush carpeting and decorated walls of the luxury suite, signs of a struggle evident in the disarray of furniture and scattered items. Brock Jamison's body lay near the bed, his eyes, chest, and even his genitals showing the horrific wounds inflicted with a knitting needle, a detail that Giovanelli found particularly disturbing. Nearby, a broken bedside lamp lay on the floor, adding to the signs of a violent confrontation. The detectives and forensic team began a systematic investigation of the suite. They photographed the scene from every angle, taking care to document the blood patterns and positioning of objects. Forensics dusted for fingerprints on the furniture, lamp, and door handles, using tools such as magnetic powder and brushes. Every detail was crucial in trying to piece together the final moments of Brock's life. Next, Giovanelli and Buntley focused on the weapon. The knitting needle, which had been left on the floor near Brock's body, appeared to be one used in the craft sessions offered to the residents, a fact that immediately raised questions. Detective Buntley pointed out that this was not a typical murder weapon, adding a layer of complexity to the case. Who would be capable of such a brutal act, and why use something so specific to the retirement home? The detectives questioned the staff, gathering any details about who may have last seen Brock alive. Some of the residents told them they had seen Brock the previous evening, but no one reported anything out of the ordinary. Forensic experts swabbed for DNA and collected fibers and hair samples, hoping for a match that could reveal more about the killer's identity. As they left the scene that morning, Giovanelli and Buntley shared a quiet understanding. This was not going to be a straightforward case. In a place like Sunset Palms, where residents had their own histories, secrets, and connections to Brock, the investigation would require digging deep into both his life and the lives of those who might have wanted him dead. Detectives Teresa Giovanelli and Jim Buntley began their investigation by questioning Helen Mathers, a 90-year-old resident at Sunset Palms who had been close to Brock. Helen was a former strip club owner known for her crass wit, wealth, and ability to command attention, even in her older years. Helen's relationship with Brock had started innocently enough. He'd helped her with her daily errands around the home and often kept her company. But their connection quickly evolved into something sexual. Helen, wealthy and accustomed to getting her way, showered Brock with gifts, giving him everything from tailored clothes to electronics. In return, he offered her sex, which Helen adored. For a woman like Helen, Brock represented both a connection to her vibrant past and a thrilling secret. Their relationship soon turned sexual, with Brock promising her exclusivity, a commitment Helen valued deeply. But Brock couldn't keep it in his pants, something which ignited Helen's jealousy. The tension reached a breaking point one night in early January, just after New Year's Day. Helen had gone for a late walk around the grounds of Sunset Palms and decided to visit the pool area. There, to her shock and horror, she found Brock and her longtime enemy, Wanda Robinson, naked and having sex in pool. Wanda, an 87-year-old former jazz singer, had been Helen's rival for years, and seeing her with Brock ignited a deep, uncontrollable rage in Helen. In her police interview, Helen described the moment as devastating and claimed it felt like a stab to my bleeping heart. The detectives noted her emotional response, watching as her carefully composed expression cracked while she described Brock's betrayal. She admitted to having felt jealous, angry, and deeply hurt by his unfaithfulness, especially with someone like Wanda, whom she saw as unworthy and sneaky. Though she tried to maintain her pride, Helen was visibly affected by recounting the discovery of Brock's infidelity. Detectives Giovanelli and Buntley pressed Helen further, questioning her about her whereabouts on the night of Brock's death. Helen stated that she had been in her suite alone, vaping and watching adult movies on her laptop. Her tone was defiant but tinged with sadness. Despite her wealth and strong personality, Helen's age showed as she answered their questions, her voice occasionally trembling. When asked directly if she had any reason to harm Brock, Helen's response was sharp. "I might have been bleeping angry, but I love that bleeping boy, especially his giant bleep," she replied. The detectives noted her emotions but also noticed a subtle bitterness in her tone. While Helen denied any involvement, her possessiveness and resentment over Brock's betrayal painted her as a strong suspect in the case. After interviewing Helen, detectives Giovanelli and Buntley turned their attention to Wanda Jazz Robinson, the second primary suspect in Brock's murder. Wanda, 87, had led an eventful life as a jazz singer and was known for her free-spirited personality and a laundry list of sexual partners, even into her later years. Her rivalry with Helen had started as playful sexual competition, but eventually became a full-blown feud. Wanda and Helen had, over the years, developed a reputation for their sexual conquests within Sunset Palms. Each took pride in their ability to coerce others into sex with them, with an unspoken contest to see who could have the most sexual partners among the retirement community residents, and more than occasionally the younger staff. Both women made it clear that they weren't bound by traditional ideas of sexual relationships. Instead, like the products of the free-love 60s they openly pursued brief sexual relationships with men and women alike, much to the amusement, and sometimes the dismay of others at the home. Their rivalry grew more heated when Brock entered the picture. Wanda, intrigued by his charm and youthful energy, quickly became one of his many sexual partners, much to Helen's frustration. But Wanda was unbothered by Helen's jealousy, enjoying the thrill of being Brock's secret lover and relishing the drama it stirred up between her and Helen. When detectives sat down to question Wanda, she was unusually frank, even laughing at times. She admitted that her sexual relationship with Brock had been nothing serious and saw it as just one of her many flings. "He bleaked my bleep," she told police, "and sometimes I bleaked his." However, her tone changed as she discussed her health. Wanda confessed that years of a high-risk lifestyle, especially her extreme promiscuity, had caught up with her. "I'm dying of STDs," she said with a casual shrug, explaining that her body wasn't what it used to be. She detailed how her doctors had recently diagnosed her with multiple sexually transmitted infections, which had weakened her health considerably. This detail caught the detective's attention. Wanda pointed out that, given her condition, she hardly had the physical strength or stamina to commit such a violent act. "I can't even open a bleeping pickle jar these days, let alone stab someone eyes out," she joked. Her admission about her health challenges supported her claim of innocence, and her casual, unapologetic attitude made it clear she felt no guilt or strong enough jealousy to hurt Brock. Wanda's alibi was also solid. She had spent the night of Brock's murder with a friend in a nearby suite, watching an adult movie on the Playboy network. "It didn't turn me on," she admitted sadly. Detectives noted her alibi and dismissed her as an unlikely suspect, but Wanda's frank confessions and her unfiltered rivalry with Helen added another layer of drama to the investigation. While Wanda admitted she was no saint, she emphasized that her health problems alone would prevent her from taking violent action, no matter how heated her rivalry with Helen might have been. A few days into the investigation, police uncovered a shocking twist that completely changed the direction of the case. While searching Brock's room for any overlooked clues, Detective Giovanelli found a notebook hidden beneath the mattress. The plain, leather-bound journal appeared ordinary at first, but it held details that gave investigators a new perspective on Brock's tangled life at Sunset Palms. Flipping through the pages, Giovanelli saw that Brock had been keeping meticulous notes on his sexual relationships with at least 24 elderly residents, both male and female, documenting private details about each affair. The notebook was filled with explicit descriptions of sexual encounters, his opinions on each partner's personality and sexual performance, and most importantly, notes about their finances. Brock seemed to view these relationships as a game, categorizing each lover's wealth and how he could potentially benefit from them. The notebook also revealed Brock's plans to turn his scandalous life into a tell-all blog. He had written outlines for blog posts detailing the sex lives of wealthy retirees, whom he referred to by thinly veiled nicknames. He mentioned creating a blog to expose the secrets of Sunset Palms, specifically targeting Helen Mathers and Wanda Robinson, his most high-profile sexual partners. In one entry, dated a week before his death, Brock wrote about the gold mine he was sitting on, predicting the blog would go viral and lead to TV or magazine offers. He mentioned outlets like TMZ and Inside Edition, which he thought would be interested in buying his story. The twist made it clear that Brock's relationships weren't only about charm or attraction. They were part of a calculated plan. Detectives Giovanelli and Buntley realized that Brock had intended to publish his blog soon, which could have deeply embarrassed some of the wealthy residents. The discovery of his plans gave the investigation a new focus, the possibility that someone wanted to keep these secrets buried. Upon learning of the notebook, both detectives agreed they needed to look deeper into Helen and Wanda's connections with Brock, especially now that there was a strong potential motive for murder. They also expanded their list of potential suspects to include staff members and other residents who might have feared public exposure from Brock's blog. As word of the discovery spread quietly through the community, Sunset Palms residents reacted with alarm and paranoia. Staff and residents alike wondered if they might appear in Brock's notebook, adding to an already tense atmosphere at the home. The notebook provided detectives with a roadmap to Brock's social life, and crucially, a clearer understanding of his motives and the people who might have wanted to silence him. The new evidence shifted the investigation's momentum. Detectives now focused on uncovering who knew about Brock's blog and might have wanted to stop it, especially given his habit of exposing sensitive information for personal gain. Nigel O'Keefe, the 52-year-old manager of Sunset Palms, was known around the retirement community for his polished British accent, tailored suits, and charming demeanor. But behind that refined exterior, Nigel was hiding a dark and twisted secret. Originally from Coventry, England, Nigel had a history of managing exclusive retirement homes for the wealthy. But back home, he had been involved in a highly questionable and highly profitable side business. Nigel secretly recorded private, sexual encounters of the residents, marketing and selling the footage to Japan, where unusually adult content involving elderly white women is considered extremely popular. When he came to the United States, Nigel saw a new opportunity at Sunset Palms. He knew the upscale retirement home catered to wealthy residents, many of whom led interesting, often adventurous lives. Seeing an untapped market, he began a secret scheme similar to his old operations in England. By installing hidden cameras in some of the private suites and con areas, he captured sexual moments that the residents had no idea were being recorded. Nigel wasn't satisfied with just installing hidden cameras, though. He took things a step further by creating an environment that would encourage the wanton sexual behavior he wanted to capture. He intentionally hired young, attractive aides, specifically seeking those with charm and charisma who could naturally connect with the elderly residents. Brock Jamison, with his easygoing manner, good looks, and flirtatious nature, was exactly the kind of employee Nigel wanted on his team. Nigel knew that Brock's charm would likely draw the attention of the older women, and maybe even some of the men, at Sunset Palms. Over time, Nigel encouraged Brock and other aides to start sexual relationships with as many residents as possible. Although he never explicitly told them to start romantic or sexual relationships with them, he knew Brock's personality and lifestyle would likely lead in that direction. By creating this opportunity for Brock and others, Nigel carefully manipulated situations to increase the chances of intimate sexual encounters that he could record. To keep his scheme running smoothly, Nigel avoided interfering too directly with his staff or the residents' lives. He watched from a distance, making sure the relationships developed naturally. He also covered his tracks meticulously, disguising the cameras and keeping his files encrypted and stored on a remote server that was difficult to trace. The recordings he made were sent to specific contacts in Japan, who would then distribute them to the massive paying audience there. Nigel's business was lucrative, and he had built a small fortune off these exploitative practices. However, Nigel's scheme began to unravel as detectives dug deeper into Brock's death. During the investigation, one of the younger aides mentioned that Nigel had always been very interested in the sexual dynamics between residents and staff, which struck Detective Giovanelli as odd. Investigators then uncovered a hidden camera in one of the private suites, raising immediate suspicion. As they questioned Nigel, he initially denied any involvement in Brock's death and deflected questions about his activities. When pressed further, Nigel tried to downplay the hidden cameras as security measures, but his explanation didn't hold up. Detectives grew more convinced that Nigel's elaborate scheme might have something to do with Brock's murder, especially if Nigel felt his secrets and lucrative business were at risk of exposure. They now saw Nigel as a potential suspect with serious motives, particularly if he had learned about Brock's tell-all blog plans. Nigel, realizing he was under close scrutiny, grew more defensive and agitated, making detectives even more suspicious. In January 2016, after weeks of tension, Helen Mathers decided to end the turmoil in her own way. Consumed by a toxic blend of anger and jealousy, she plotted Brock's death carefully, feeling as if she had no other choice. Brock's frequent affairs and his unfaithful encounter with Wanda Robinson in the community pool had left her humiliated, and her emotions boiled over each time she saw him with someone else. Helen felt betrayed by his lies and driven by a need to reclaim the control she felt had been stolen from her. On the night of the murder, Helen's emotions were a volatile mix of sadness, anger, and a strange calm. She lured Brock to her apartment, pretending she wanted to have sex with him. But beneath her words was a hidden motive. As he sat comfortably in her living room, likely expecting a wild evening of drugs and sex, she quietly took a knitting needle from her bag. Before Brock even realized her intentions, she stabbed him wildly in the eyes, chest, and genitals. In the days following Brock's death, Helen tried to carry on as usual, but as police intensified their investigation, she grew increasingly anxious. She watched news reports on Brock's murder, her hands trembling as she saw detectives questioning other residents. Her unease grew as rumors circulated around Sunset Palms, and she struggled to mask her guilt. Detectives began to zero in on Helen after discovering Brock's recent blog drafts. In one post, Brock had mentioned Helen's possessiveness and hinted at her jealousy, painting a clear picture of a fraught relationship. Furthermore, surveillance footage showed Brock entering Helen's room on the night of the murder but never leaving, a detail that quickly raised suspicion. With mounting evidence, detectives brought Helen in for questioning. Faced with hours of intense interrogation, Helen eventually broke down, confessing to the murder. The weight of her actions seemed to crush her as she spoke. Her face was pale, her voice barely above a whisper, as she admitted to taking Brock's life. Helen's initial feelings of control had dissolved entirely, leaving her feeling empty, ashamed, and exposed. Helen's arrest was met with shock and gossip throughout Sunset Palms. As police led her out in handcuffs, she felt the weight of her actions pressing down on her, her life forever altered by the violent choice she made that night. In January 2017, Helen Mathers took a bold and unconventional approach in her murder trial defense, claiming that societal judgment against her sexual freedom was ultimately responsible for Brock's death. Dubbed the promiscuous woman defense, Helen argued through her lawyer, Denise Dunker-Callahan, that years of societal pressure and stigmatization around her private life drove her to the breaking point. Helen painted a picture of a society that condemns older women for exploring their sexuality, suggesting this latent hostility forced her into a corner, sparking the tragic events that ended in Brock's murder. During the trial, Helen described how the retirement community and even her family looked down on her relationships, particularly her intensely sexual romance with Brock, a man nearly 70 years younger. She emphasized that her jealousy over Brock's affairs wasn't merely personal but compounded by the feeling that everyone was waiting for her to fail. Her defense team presented the narrative that society's deep-rooted judgment of women like Helen created a toxic environment that triggered her desperate actions. Prosecutor Roger Fields, however, pushed back hard against this defense. Fields argued that Helen's actions were driven by possessiveness and jealousy, not societal pressure. The prosecutor painted Helen as someone who felt entitled to control Brock, then lashed out when she couldn't. Fields brought forward witnesses from Sunset Palms who testified about Helen's possessive nature and frequent conflicts with other residents over Brock. Surveillance footage and Brock's own online posts underscored the instability of their relationship, and Fields argued that Helen alone was responsible for Brock's death. The jury deliberated for 3 days. Ultimately, they were unconvinced by Helen's promiscuous woman defense, seeing it as an attempt to deflect blame. On January 28, 2017, Helen was found guilty of second-degree murder. As the verdict was read, Helen sat expressionless, her face pale and her hands folded in her lap. She seemed distant, as if already resigned to her fate. At sentencing, Helen received a prison term of 25 years without the possibility of parole, ensuring she would spend the remainder of her life behind bars. Despite her defense strategy, the judge made it clear that Helen's choices, not societal biases, were ultimately to blame. As she was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs, Helen appeared worn and defeated, the weight of her actions visibly crushing her. For Helen, the sentence was a final, unchangeable end. Her attempt to shift blame to societal prejudice had failed, leaving her to face the consequences of her actions alone. After the trial in January 2017, the lives of Helen Groves, Wanda Robinson, and Nigel Campbell each took tragic or unexpected turns, shaping the legacy of the Sunset Palms murder scandal. The conclusion of Brock Jamison's murder trial seemed to mark the end of one story, but the aftermath told a different one. Wanda Robinson, one of Sunset Palms' most well-known residents, faced serious health problems after the trial. Known for her extreme promiscuity, Wanda admitted during court proceedings that she was suffering from multiple sexually transmitted diseases. These diseases had been slowly weakening her, and within months of the trial's conclusion, Wanda's health took a sharp decline. By early April 2017, Wanda passed away due to complications from her illnesses. Her death marked a somber end to the spirited woman who had long been a central figure in the community's underground dramas. Residents of Sunset Palms later held a small memorial for her, remembering her as both a controversial and lively character. For Helen Groves, prison proved harsh and isolating. Already facing a long sentence at her advanced age, Helen struggled to adjust to her new life behind bars. Then in early 2020, the COVID-19 pandemic swept through her facility, infecting multiple inmates. Helen, already in fragile health, contracted the virus and was unable to recover. She passed away in her cell in April 2020, adding her name to the list of pandemic casualties across the country's prison systems. Helen's death closed the final chapter on her life, marked by scandal and the tragic outcome of her relationship with Brock. Meanwhile, Nigel Campbell's fate took an unexpected twist. Although his voyeuristic and exploitative scheme at Sunset Palms was exposed, legal loopholes prevented him from facing serious criminal charges. Free from prosecution, Nigel returned not to his home country, but became a minor celebrity in Japan's adult film industry. The scandal surrounding his recordings at Sunset Palms and his unique approach to adult media found an audience overseas. Nigel quickly became a small, but infamous figure in the Japanese adult film world, directing and producing content that reportedly paid homage to his escapades in Florida. Although his fame was controversial, it provided him with both a fan base and financial security. The final fates of Wanda, Helen, and Nigel reflect a story that began with betrayal and jealousy, spiraling into unexpected outcomes. Each of them left behind a complicated legacy, woven into the fabric of the Sunset Palms scandal.